What colors make up a good watercolor palette? Today I'm going to try to answer that. If you're like me, you bought a starter watercolor set, something like this. And then you just used whatever colors came in there for a very long time. I started off with this one, which is the Cotman line. You might consider that the student grade line. Both of these pans are from Winsor & Newton. That's just the brand I happen to be using. I'm not sponsored by them. But today I'm going to try to answer if what you get in a basic starter set is sufficient to have a good palette. For a very long time, I just used the colors that the set would come with, and I would wonder why I could not get very dark colors. I couldn't get contrasts. I would look at paintings done in other mediums like oil and acrylic, and I would be jealous, and I would think that watercolor was insufficient for creating deep, rich contrasts. Like, for example, a Caravaggio painting. There was no way that you could do that in watercolor. That was what I thought anyway. That is, at least until I discovered that you can just buy other pigments. No one told me you could do that. Here's some of my older work just to show you what I'm talking about. This is an old still life I had done. And while I think I did a pretty good job, you can see I really didn't get the contrast I wanted, particularly with this tablecloth. I think this is permanent sap green, and I just tried to layer it over and over and over, and I never could get dark. Ideally, the background would be quite a bit darker so I could draw focus to my subject here. This is another piece I had done. It's a play on Baba Yaga, but again, nothing here is particularly dark. I think the darkest value I achieve here is just by globbing on some paint, unless you count the black. Then here's a more recent piece. It's inspired by Hokusai. And again, nothing here is particularly dark. The darkest here is probably achieved by actually using a micron pen for hatching. So again, for a long time, I just thought you couldn't get very dark with watercolor. Turns out you can. So I purchased this set online. It is a box of empty half pans, which will probably last me the rest of my life. It was just a few dollars. And this is probably obvious to anyone who's worked with watercolor for a significant amount of time, but it was new to me. You can buy these and make your own half pans out of tubes, such as this one. So my palette now has a few additions to it. This is Hooker's Green. This one is Olive Green. I write the name of it on the side. But those are nice, but they're not particularly dark. What's really made a difference for me of late, this is Perylene Green, and this is Winsor Violet. Again, I happen to use Winsor & Newton, but I'm sure there are equivalents in other brands. And here those two are. Not sure how well you can see, but Winsor Violet is a Series 1 tube, so will not be that expensive. Perylene Green is Series 2, so a little bit more expensive, but still quite affordable considering this will last you a very long time, years. My recent edition, which I haven't even opened yet, is Indanthrene Blue. This one is Series 3 and cost me around 20 bucks, so it did hurt a bit to purchase, but I think it'll be worth it. This is a work I finished this week, actually. And take a look at these very dark spots here. That is pure Perylene Green, and I just love how much darker it is than basically everything else here. I didn't know that this level of darkness was possible before. If I wanted to achieve this, I would just glob on as much Payne's Gray as I had available. And that's just since Payne's Gray happens to come with this starter set. Here are some swatches I made, and there's Perylene Green and Winsor Violet. And you can't quite tell how dark it is from just the swatches, but it does allow your work to get a significantly darker value, which just unlocks so much with watercolor. So what I like to do with these tubes, I don't fill the whole pan in one go. I just fill it up maybe like a third or a fourth of the way, and then you let it dry, because what's going to happen is there's a lot of moisture in this tube at the moment. So when it does dry, it sinks down. And you can see the first one I made is this hooker's green, and it just gets this sort of concave effect, which is fine, but doesn't look as nice as the professional ones. See here, these two are newer, so I've gotten better at pouring them in. But you go in batches. You pour a third or a fourth, wait a few days for it to dry, and then you repeat the process until it's full. I also use a little pin here and just kind of stir it up. And that's both to spread it and to get any air bubbles out, because again, those will make a difference when it dries. Tap that down. Now that we have our paints out, we can of course give it a go. Just going to use what's left on this pin here so as not to waste it, and make a little swatch. There we go. Nice gradient. Just look at how much darker that is compared to pretty much all of my pigments. A nice rich blue that I'll absolutely get some nice use out of. Now for my opinions on starter palettes. I don't really know what kind of philosophy goes into designing a palette like this, but I have some thoughts. For one, this particular kit comes with both yellow ochre and raw sienna, and I don't really know why it includes both. To me, those are basically the same color. I'm sure someone in the comments will say, no, raw sienna, I use it all the time. It's completely different than yellow ochre, but if we just have a limited palette like what comes in here, I don't see the need for both, personally. What I feel is missing is some kind of a magenta. Obviously, magenta is a primary color, so you can't really get that. You have to mix it to combine other colors. I'm sure that's a cost-based decision, since magenta, I think, is an expensive hue, but you don't really get anything close to it, any kind of purple. So I would absolutely add something like Winsor Violet to your palette. Now, this particular kit doesn't come with white, but the Cotman series does, and this is called Chinese white, this particular one. I don't know why that's in there. Again, you're only given a few colors. I don't really see the use case for white in watercolor. I'm sure you can do some kind of like white globs here and there, but for the most part, white is not a useful color in watercolor, in my opinion. And as I've talked about at length here, we really don't get anything dark at all, which, given how many people start watercolor and then give up on it entirely, I feel like that's a miss by these paint making companies. I think watercolor is a pretty challenging medium, and someone starting out should be given all the advantages they can. Of course, cost comes into play, right? These sets need to be made affordable, so I don't really know how much pigment A versus pigment B costs and the scale of that, but those are just my thoughts on someone who's been using watercolor for a while. So what do you think of my thoughts on watercolor palettes? Will you be making a change to your palette? Will you be adding or subtracting any pigments that come with yours? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed today's video, I'd appreciate it if you could like and subscribe. Until next time.